name is Carl Pearson, and for more than 40 years, I have been representing individuals and small businesses in fighting the excesses of large corporations and the government agencies they control. I tried running for New York State Attorney General in 2006. I have more than 100 websites available through lawball.com, and have made a series of videos for YouTube, of which this is one, and it's called Regulatory Reform. This is my 33rd video. You can see a list of my YouTube videos by searching in YouTube for CEPersVid, and here you can see it here, right here. That's sort of like a trademark, so you can get to the videos that I've produced. All quite topical, and I think very informative if you have the need to know something where I've covered that material. Now, this is regulatory reform that I'm talking about, and this is a code expression being used today in the press which refers to the various ways in which your tax money and country are being turned over to the rich. Many are not even U.S. citizens or corporations, to make them even richer and to make the rest of us in the U.S. poorer. Quote, reform, unquote, is the way in which the rich are being asked, or are actually asking themselves, to slow down the process by which the wealth in the U.S. is becoming increasingly concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer multinational corporations and the few people who control them. The U.S. is in a critical financial condition requiring reform. The major media will talk about regulatory reform as if the backers truly were going to change things, but this is quite doubtful. You can be the judge of whether any proposed regulatory reform is substantial or just more BS by comparing my agenda for regulatory reform against what you see being proposed or hopefully enacted. Here is my agenda for regulatory reform, broken into two categories. Number one, reform which creates substantial economic opportunity for U.S. citizens and residents and small businesses. And two, reform taking away unfair advantages of various groups which are presently obtaining a much higher percentage of the economy than they deserve. These two classifications do overlap to a considerable extent, just for example, antitrust. So I'm not going to talk about the overlap. I'm just sort of broadly categorizing them as either one or the other. The first category, opportunity-oriented reform in descending order of importance, and this thing, of course, is very, I think, subjective, and they're all important. But number one, I believe, is campaign financing. We have to have the public taxpayer finance the campaigns, and actually I have a lot of material on this. It won't cost anything if we require the media, the broadcast media, to use their government-owned airwaves to provide the advertising that the candidates need in a fair, allocated manner. Number two, ballot access. I saw when running for Attorney General that there is no access to the ballot. I can't get on the ballot, others can't get on. It's dominated by the two parties, and they really aren't that much difference. There isn't that much difference in the parties, so that whether one's a Republican or a Democrat, it really doesn't matter. The problems remain. So we have to have ballot access so others, reformers, can get on the ballot and make the changes that the people who are there aren't going to make, as you will find out. Three, antitrust. The statutes are there, but the government agencies and the courts have emasculated the antitrust statutes so that they no longer apply. You can just write antitrust off. It isn't working. It hasn't worked since Nixon, and you can just forget about it unless you have really major statutory reform that forces the judges into giving some justice when cases are brought, and you've got to allow private enterprise, private people, private corporations, consumers, and others to bring these actions because the government does not. Four, affordable higher education. I have a system by which you can have a free equivalency college at a cost of tuition of $2,000 a year. This thing is per student, this thing will bring true educational reform by giving an education that people can afford to upgrade their abilities and make them competitive. It will make a town prosper if any one town wants to do it, but it's even hard to find a town because the mass media is not alerting anyone to this big potential. We have to have enforcement of rights of individuals, and an attorney general at the lowest level of government would do that. They need to enforce the statutes that our regulatory agencies we see have not been enforcing at all. We also have to have high-speed broadband for everyone, not a reduced broadband. I mean, Korea has speed maybe 50 times our average speed in America. We've got to have this to be competitive, and it has to be available to all. We need to create an employment market for all, and I have created such a market, a task marketplace where everyone can be a participant. You don't have to get a job, you merely offer what the market wants, and you compete with others directly in order to obtain income for yourself. It's a new revolutionary way of bringing small business back. It needs some activity, it needs some lower cost financing at the lowest level of government. Any town can create prosperity for its people if it wants to, but apparently no one wants to do that. And then we need to have financing availability for small business. Those are all critical reforms that are needed. Now, we also have to reduce the unfair allocation of the wealth of the nation with other reforms. The first of those is to eliminate those cases and barriers that prevent the application of usury laws in the states. We have to control the outrageous interest rates that the financial institutions are now allowed to charge, and do so, and in doing so have wrecked the ability of the country to reform itself economically, because the wealth of the nation is being stolen through usury, and it's legalized at the federal level. We have to change that by statute. We have to have a reform of criminal procedure. We have 97% of the people who are charged with crime pleading guilty, even though about half would have gotten off if they had had a fair trial. We don't give fair trials. We only put people in jail. The prosecutor determines a sentence. The judge has little to do with it, and that forces people now into pleading guilty even though they're not. We have to reform that. We need taxation reform so that we have a fair system. We need litigation reform, particularly because it's grossly unfair, totally overpriced, not available to anyone except the rich, and we have to change that in a variety of ways, and having a town attorney general is certainly a beginning. And finally, not too finally, one more after this, we have to have a sunset policy on corporations that are too large to fail. We've got to take them out of the picture and allow others to compete. We also have to eliminate the excessive compensation and benefits that are being given to government employees and contractors because they're getting an unfair share of the economy, and the rest of us have to pay for it. It's not right. We should open up the right to be a government employee, to make it more competitive, to make it actually allow people to bid for jobs. That might do something. Or have a reform through a partial bankruptcy where any town or village could be put into bankruptcy to change the compensation programs that are bankrupting the states, the towns, villages, and counties throughout the United States. You can see various proposals of mine directed to many of these issues at electionissuesus.com. I'll give you the site later on in a few minutes. I believe that meaningful reform can be created by citizens and residents at the lowest level of government, and that we cannot expect much meaningful reform at the highest levels of state and local and federal, at the highest levels of state and federal government. They have been bought off so extensively that no meaningful reform will come except from the persons in control, and that is probably not going to occur during the next 10 years or so. Now, here's various contact information. The first is my website, carlperson.com, and then lawmall.com. This here is my trademark, my telephone number. That's a YouTube trademark, my telephone number, and finally election-issues-us.com. Please take a look at these sites and my references. I look forward to having you communicate with me. We have a lot of major issues that we can bring to bear for the benefit of the country. Please get involved, do something, give me a call. I look forward to talking with you. Thank you. Goodbye.